206.
Mic check, mic check.
Salutations.
1 1 1 2 1 2.
What's up, world? Welcome to another episode of the 206. It's your boy Armand, and as usual, I'm joined by the co-hosts and the homies, Jason and Tim. And for today's topic of conversation, we're gonna get into hookup culture. And as usual, we're going to give you guys a bit of personal experience, but more importantly, beyond the personal experience, we're going to get a bit into the critical analyzation of the matter at hand as well, and give you guys some of our thoughts surrounding the reality of hookup culture. So that being said, I can go ahead and pass the rock over to Tim so he can get today's conversation rolling.
Yo, peoples, Big Tim, Tampa, Florida. Hope everyone's doing well. I appreciate you coming in to listen to the 206. Thanks for your time and, away from all these events. Know it's hard out there. So on behalf of the 206, love, prayers, and condolences go out to all of you lost under the ravaging of this COVID-19. Same sentiments also go out to all of those suffering under the challenges of our time. Tonight, the 206 explores hookup culture as it relates to our personal lives and other thoughts and feelings surrounding the topic. Hookup culture is, usually surrounds it's a culture that accepts and encourages casual sex, things like one-night stands, related activities that doesn't involve heavy emotional bonding or commitments of the long term. Shows like Sex in the City, lots of hookup culture TV shows and movies out there, if you guys could think of some. But yes, so I wanted to start off by jumping into an article that I was checking out in relation to hookup culture, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. So this article was posted last year on psychologynow.com, which is a site I'm recreationally on 24/7. Love that stuff. And this article, the author was by a fine man named Jeremy Nicholson, who's a master of social work and PhD in personality and social psychology. In the article, he sets out to answer, is sex without commitment, flings, friends with benefits, a good choice for you? Should you hook up? So he starts off with the basics, stating that all of us have various preferences for the characteristics we want in a partner. We all have different goals for relationships, and states that we have different reasons for simply having sex. Bottom line, though, is that most of us use two basic strategies: long term or short term. He goes on to mention that in the old days, it was clearer as to which way you should go, and what behaviors was pretty much typical of long term versus short term. He says today more and more people are wondering whether hooking up and getting sexual with someone they are just getting to know is the only modern dating option available. Even while many of us would rather have the long-term committed relationship, which is something personally I could relate to because, it just feels like it's getting worse and worse as the years roll on.
I'm Big Tim. I like to keep it old school. I'm surprised that we didn't hear that.
Old school. It's through my friends, through my talks with families, successful long-term relationships seems to be becoming a rare thing. I hear more and more people of just hooking up. So on to the meat and potatoes of this article. So there are a total of 3 researches being done in the article, or that he expresses, but I'm only going to talk about one. And this one came from a study survey of 527 undergraduate college students within an academic year. It sought out to answer whether casual sex harmed the well-being of a student population. We're talking well-being in terms of self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and physical symptoms. And also to explore whether their choices to experience or not to experience casual genital hookups led to a whole host of other psychological symptoms. And at the same time, they also looked at various motivations for the participants hooking up. And they categorize it in 4. The first one is basically autonomous. They're calling it autonomous. It's basically when someone's curious. They're interested in the possibility of enjoyment and learning about their sexuality and considered the experience to be a positive experience for them. The second motivation is called controlled. It's basically where someone wants to improve their self-esteem, feel more desirable, to avoid unpleasant feelings. It also pertains to people who feel obligated to hook up, to please a partner, or fit in with their friends. Some of it deals with favor seeking and also trying to get revenge on someone else. The other motivation is called amotivational, which deals with individuals who claim they're tricked, coerced, or intoxicated, unable to make a decision and did not want to hook up, but it happened because they were under the influence. And then the last one is relational, which pertains to people who hope that the hookup itself will lead to a long-term relationship. So, over the course of that in particular study, it was found that 37% of participants who reported hooking up had mostly autonomous motivations, meaning they were curious. They wanted to see what it was like, and part of them felt like it would be an enjoyable experience. And then the rest of the participants who hooked up were really branching upon those other motivations, whether they felt they were intoxicated at the time and they hooked up, or they were trying to fit in, or they initially thought that possibly that hookup may lead to a long-term relationship. And there was like just a small population that really just simply didn't hook up at all. But they found that outside of those participants who had curious motivations, their well-being was significantly down. But everyone else who really didn't go into the hookups, who wasn't necessarily curious or anything like that, they were found that their self-esteem levels and other psychological factors were kind of down, deteriorated, which I thought was very interesting. So, according to Jeremy of the article, he says, given those results, it appears that the choice of whether or not to engage in casual sexual behavior should be best made by simply listening to one's own internal motivations and preferences. Now, I thought it was interesting. My biggest takeaway from this in particular study was that it simply made me feel appreciative of the people and family like in my life, just for guiding me as it relates to relationships in general. No matter how close or how far I found myself surrounding my own casual sexual experiences, I know looking back that my value system made the difference in coming out of those with myself and my friends and family intact or not. But it also made me want to add that motivation and pressure towards casual sex alone is but a small part of the bigger picture. And I feel like questions like, why did my partner participate? Where did my motives, my own curiosities and influences come from? Does my drinking or need for acceptance or self-esteem rule my entrance into these circumstances? Questions like that I feels just should be verbalized, expressed as far as its importance in identifying, where you're at as it relates to these hookup experiences. Now, before I pass the ball, I wanted to also just briefly talk about my own personal experience.
You say you're gonna pass the rock without taking a shot, Doug? Dang.
Surrounding his, yeah, I'll let that. What's that? Who's the kid who played Boston Celtics one year? Rondo. Call me Rondo. So I had roughly, I thought about it. I had to think about it last night. There was like 7 times in my life, I believe, where I experienced physical sex in some form of another. You know, a lot of times in that hookup manner. And each time I had, if I could just bring some of the article into it, they were really out of autonomous motivations. There was a lot of curiosity involved, and a huge chunk of that was also controlled motivations. There was a part of me that was going through a lot in life. I was trying to avoid unpleasant feelings, and there was a huge sense of obligation to hook up to please my partner. And there was a little bit of hope that it would lead to a long term. But specifically, it was the motivations surrounding the controlled variety. The fact surrounding unpleasant feelings and my obligation to hook up to please someone else that really guided me the heaviest in my hookup experiences. Now, I consider myself a very strong individual in terms of resilience to the emotional and mental up and downs of my life. But my love for humanity in general, I would articulate, runs extremely deep, like alien deep, like so deep that I wish I could spend my entire life writing how much I love and what I love about everyone I've ever came across in my life. If I could do that without worrying about, you know, meeting my needs in terms of survival. And I think that it's that depth of my love that played its role into me skirting the bond, just skirting the need a lot of times to turn my bonds with the women in my life into something more, and like into something further. I learned over the years to be grateful for the seriousness of my own personal humanity while being self clear with it so that I can better stay behind the lines without crossing them with the women. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, that was my takeaway from reading that article and some of my personal experience overview in relation to hookup culture. It's pretty interesting.
No doubt, no doubt. I guess I
Mm.
can go ahead and yeah, Tim. I think there's a lot of things you said that I want to speak on, but I'll go ahead and share some of my personal experiences first and some of my thoughts and reflections on that, and then maybe after Jason does his things as well, we can kind of get into more of the analyzation and the reflection upon everything. But yeah, for me, let's see. Honestly speaking, there's been only one. I would say technically two, but really only one time in my life that I've done anything physical with someone that I wasn't in a committed relationship with. I say one for sure, but then technically two because the other person, and this is how I actually had my first kiss. The other person, the girl I had my first kiss with, we were friends for a long time, like for a long, long time. And we had that first kiss. So even with her, there's already a sense of intimacy established and that was there. That was the primary motivation for me to want to have my first kiss with her anyway. So outside of her, there's just only one girl where like I didn't really know her at all. And we ended up hooking up. And I guess that term is relative for everyone because for most of society, when you hear the term hooking up, I guess people think of sex. But I'll go ahead and just share with the entire share with the world because I have no problem with it. But I'm a virgin, so when I say hooking up, I'm not necessarily talking about sex. I'm just talking about basically anything physical. So I'll go ahead and explain. I'll give a bit of a. I'll give the story behind the I would see in my mind the first and only time I've really done anything physical with a girl that I wasn't in a committed relationship with. So, uh, you know, we may be a small podcast now, but I think in the future we're going to be the most popular podcast in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and protect the protect the lives of the innocent and not really give any names or too much revealing information that could give this person's identity away. And I'll just go ahead and say this person, it was from a work experience that I encountered this person. I'm not going to say the job or where I was because, again, revealing information, but it was a work experience. And long and the short is that in this work experience, they didn't work at the same job as me, but I encountered this person through work a lot. And there was a time where she was like, Armand, you don't have to be so formal when you're on the phone with me. And I was just like, well, I was like, my boss is like in the other room and he likes me to be formal over the phone. So, but hey, I'll let you know. Like when he's gone, go ahead and like I can kick it with you, right? If that's what you if that's what you want. So we just started talking a little bit more casually on the phone when my boss wasn't present. I can just shoot the shit with her. Long of the short is that she ended up wanting to hang out with me, and she was like really clearly down for hanging out, and I was just like, it's whatever. Sorry, a little bit distracted by stuff going on in the background of my house. Anyways, I was like kind of hesitant because I kind of knew where the energy was, and I wasn't really about trying to have like an actual relationship with her. And this girl was like super, super flirtatious. It was very obvious, what was going through her mind and stuff. And so I remember one of the times is like I was actually, I guess this is technically revealing information or whatever. I was getting ready to leave where I was living to go somewhere else, right? I was getting ready to make a move. And she was like, "Oh, wait, you leave in 2 weeks? That sucks." She's like, "I didn't even get a chance to smoke you out yet." And I was like, "Oh, actually, I don't smoke." She's like, "That's because you haven't smoked with me." And I was like, "I'm sure you're a great time, but no, I don't smoke at all. But we can still hang out if you're down, you know?" She's like, "All right, no worries. Then we don't have to smoke. But yeah, let's hang out for sure." And I was like, "Yeah, just we can set up a time, or whatever." So I don't know exactly how much longer it was, but obviously it was within the span of a week or two because again I was leaving, and I ended up driving out to meet her somewhere, and again, it was very clear the energy in the beginning that what was probably going to go down. But for me, like I said, part of the reason why I haven't really engaged in hookup culture at all is because it's not that it doesn't feel good, honestly. Because obviously, I mean, anyone with half a brain knows that physical intimacy of any level feels good. So obviously, that's not the reason why. And it isn't for me. I know a lot of people, particularly. There's regardless of people if you are religious or identify as religious or not, most people I believe in society have this kind of binary way of thinking when it comes to like death and the afterlife and like decisions. It's like, oh, if you make good decisions, you go to air quotes heaven, and if you make bad decisions, you go to air quotes hell. And it's even if you don't believe in that, that's what the prevailing ideology is about heaven and hell and good decisions and bad decisions, regardless if you believe in it or not. Like that's like the mainstream ideology. And again, you guys got an episode of the Baha'i Faith a little bit in the last episode, and we will do a specific series on different principles of the Baha'i Faith. And one of them is about the afterlife. And Baha'is don't believe in heaven and hell in the conventional sense, like these are physical places. Like if you're good, you go to heaven with the mansions and the angels. And if you're bad, you go burn in the nevermost fire for all of eternity. It's more, to put it simply, a condition, you either are close to God or further away from God. You're either receiving God's love and bounty or you're not. And from a Baha'i perspective, if in the afterlife you're not capable of receiving, God's love and bounty, then what could be worse than that? So that can be considered as hell. And if your soul is progressing and you are able to receive God's love and bounty, you can look at that as heaven, because again, what can be better than that? So for me, deciding, whether or not, again, this can be applied to anything. It's not just like hookup cultures. Any decision that I want to make, it's not so much as like, oh, if I do this, am I committing a sin, or am I doing a bad deed? Am I going to go to hell? It's more so of, what's the meaning or purpose behind this, and does it serve me in a way that I want to be served, right? So when it comes to hookup culture, it's like, yeah, it will serve me in a very a very surface level sense, in a very primitive sense. Like whatever encounter I engage in is going to feel good temporarily in that moment, but ultimately, is it really serving me? Is it helping me grow as a person? Is it benefiting me in any meaningful way? And for me, it's like very clearly that that's not how it is. It's usually either benefiting me in a very surface level and primitive way, or it's, as Tim was alluding to in some of the in the article he's mentioning, I'm trying to escape from something, and both options to me can be, one is like, okay, like I can either decide to do something that's going to feel good and benefit me and be meaningful, or I can find some other way to really encounter my problem head on instead of trying to escape from it, right? So going back to the story at hand, I don't even know why I went on that little soapbox rant, but going back to the story at hand, there we go. For me, like, yeah, the reason why up to this point it was gonna be my first time of randomly hooking up. It's not because again I judge it or think that if I do it I'm gonna go to hell. It's just because again it doesn't. I don't think it serves me in any meaningful way. I guess you can say it's vapid in that sense. So, anyways, with this girl, she gets in the car and we talk for a while, I mean, I talked, I think one of the first things we talked about, I asked her, like, are you single? Are you single? Because the one thing I don't want to do is like, I'm in here with someone's wife or I'm in here with someone's fiance or someone's girlfriend. Like, I don't got time for the angry boyfriend games or whatever. So, she had told me like, oh yeah, I've been with someone in a long term relationship, but we've broken up. We've been broken up, or I don't know, something we've been broken up for like the past 4 months or something, however, some period of time, and that she'd been going on a few dates, but all the guys were whack, yada 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 yada, right? So, anyways, for me, it's like I knew what was going to go down because like I was already like I was down for hooking up with her, but I was like, at least let me get to know her a bit because again, I need some basic level of intimacy or connection in order for the physical things to even really feel good for me. So we ended up driving around in my car for like a couple hours, and then we ended up we were kind of done driving around town. I don't know, we just got to a point where we're just like kind of looking at each other. All right, is it gonna go down now? And we just proceeded to make out for I don't know however long, right? And it felt great. It was, I mean, it felt really good. I think there was a little bit of physical chemistry there, and she was into it. I was into it. It was fantastic. In a very basic sense. And then, yeah, the funny part about that story too is when I ended up moving to where I moved to, like this is like some 3, 4 months later. I'm in my car and I'm cleaning it out, and I'm in the passenger seat and I see like these earrings. I look at them and they're like clearly not any of my earrings, right? These are like female earrings. I'm looking at them. I'm like, whose earrings are these? I was like really lost. I'm thinking like, what girls have been in my car this can be even possibly be? And I was thinking, I'm like, and I know I'm a pretty observant guy. Most of the girls I hang out with, whether the girls I'm interested in are just regular platonic friends, like I'd be able to put it to, I'll be able to place it like, oh, this is so and so's earring or this is such and such earrings. I'm like, I don't know whose earrings these are. And then like a flash just came over my eyes, and like I remember like the positions, the way our bodies were contorted in the car. I'm like, oh, yeah, I know whose earrings these are. So I ended up sending her a Snapchat. Like I put the earrings on. I ended up sending her a Snapchat. I forgot what I said. Obviously, I probably just said something cheeky. And then she never responded. She had actually stopped responding because again, when I left, I would just text her from time to time, just to say what's up, and nothing serious. And then like she didn't respond at all. And I think I went on her Facebook and I saw that she got back with that guy that she was with, and I think they're like on the road to marriage now. So that's that. And I think they're like, okay, well clearly she's back with him, so that's probably why she ignored my Snapchat. So, anyways, yeah, I mean, that was my, you can say, from my definition, my lone experience with hooking up. And I can get into a bit more of the reflection behind that particular experience. I mean, I know I said a little bit already of why I don't really participate in hookup culture. And, but yeah, maybe I can give a bit more reflection upon it later. But I'll go ahead and pass the rock over to Jason so he can share whatever
Mm.
he would like to share.
Right, yeah. Appreciate everyone listening now in the 206. Hope learning continues. Here we are learning about the hookup culture. And that article you brought up, Tim, is great. It really kind of helped put some words to some of those experiences, even that, in my time in hookup culture, I would say I had explored aspects of maybe each of those kind of pathways that was mentioned in this article. In particular, though, I think the one about fitting in, I'm not so sure I related to that part. My experience with hookup culture, if you will, or some aspects of promiscuity or sexual engagement with individuals that I knew for a very little amount of time. All those kinds of dynamics never, I guess, had peer pressure per se, right? It wasn't like influencing the experience. In fact, it might have been the opposite for me because growing up the way I grew up, my action was such that I was more interested in kind of like partnership by way of marriage and starting a family. That was kind of my disposition, I would say, for most of my teenage years into my early 20s. I had more say committed relationships of years in length. Two relationships, both could say of within years. So I think I was probably in my late 20s before
I became a
I,
dog and I just started howling at the
yeah,
moon.
you know,
Howling at
to
that
some
blue moon.
effect, you know, well, yeah, it all comes full circle, isn't it? But so to some effect, it was going into it with a lot of consciousness. You know, we could call it option A, that curiosity and exploration. Another way it could be was I had to induce myself to be open to an experience. Typically, when I say induce, I'm referring to inebriation. So something to,
Gotcha.
have a put down some of my uh, I don't want to call them walls. I'm going to call them like uh,
Inhibitions?
inhibitions. Yeah, the parameters that I usually live by in a sober way. Some of those things were difficult for me to consciously release and be comfortable. It took practice. In fact, I had later in my early 30s, I had a partner that we were. This was a partner I had long term for a couple of years. She really helped me with some sexual healing work, I would say, like a certain attitude I had around sex that we explore that together in a very conscious way. I would say prior to that, I didn't have conscious experiences around sex. I recall not having the greatest experiences with it, with my with certain aspects of my partnerships, and there's a lot I could get into with that. In short, what I can say was aspects of hookup culture, that curiosity, a little bit of the unknown somehow lent itself to the possibility, for me anyway, this mindset of a possibility of being involved in an energy maybe I've never felt before. You know, um, maybe it's like almost like dancing in a way, had some of those energies. Like, well, maybe you try a certain kind of dance, you've never danced like that, so it feels different. It resonates different. Maybe if you were trained to dance in this one way, or you had thought you were told this is how it goes, and then you come to find out that there's other ways to dance. It was kind of like that for me. It's kind of like, wow, like this is a whole world I didn't know nothing about. I measured that a little bit just with my interest still in partnership. So um, trying these different kind of in the hookup way, trying different uh, experiences with that. And I say trying different experiences because for me, it looked a lot different each time.
Mm.
Over the course of, maybe a handful of years, uh, when I was more, open to these energies and experiences, I had met um, different women, everything from it was a physical attraction to an emotional attraction to just really intellectual kind of like exchange in conversation. Um, I've had experiences on a smaller degree, but I remember with someone that we didn't even speak uh, the same language.
Okay.
You
I thought you
know,
meant there's just no talking at all. It was just
well, let me say it this way: this is an individual whose English was clearly not maybe a second language, maybe a third language. I don't know. New to English, and enough English, of course, for us to have. We spent like a date. It was like a date. We went on dinner we had dinner together, and I think we might have went dancing perhaps, and then we had a sexual experience. Like it was all part of the same trajectory, but the language itself played a little role in that at that time. There was a lot of physical chemistry, and there was also a lot of verbal or physical confirmation, by way of how you communicate with someone physically, where you might, place your hand on someone's leg, or if you're holding hands, or how you might kiss somebody, someone you don't even know, really. You know what I mean? Like, some of that stuff is wild to think about just in a hypothetical way, because also when those moments are happening, they're really circumstantial. They kind of, at least in my case, they were moment by moment and case by case, and really kind of stood uniquely. I mentioned a relationship coming out of a hookup. I had a situation, again, another woman from a different country, although English was the first language of that country. And she was a graduate student at one of the universities. It is a major city I was living in at the time. In any case, we hung out, like we met actually in the neighborhood of where we lived. Met in the neighborhood that day, started talking. She was a journalism major, graduate student working at one of, prestigious university at a high level. She told me about her experience, where she's from, different continent, her experience in America and in education. We talked a lot. We had a lot of interesting conversations. It led to us going out, and it led to, again, as the night went on, sexual experience, which led to, maybe about a 4-week kind of relationship before she, she had to make a move, or I forget exactly. She's like finishing her schooling. I can't remember the details of why we stopped, but it was interesting. I didn't plan that at all. I don't think she planned that. It was really just random. That was totally random. So those were a few experiences. And then going back to this idea of alcohol, then influence of alcohol, I can think of maybe one or two experiences where alcohol was definitely the prime mover of the engagement with people. So this
Blame
might
it
have
on the
been
Henny.
totally right. This was probably more the club scene experience, where this kind of energy. Some people that I knew who operated in the clubs, they worked with the clubs, or very involved. We could just leave it at that. So that energy is kind of fast life energy. It's definitely not committal in general, right? You're there for a good time. You're dancing. The DJ changes songs every 30 seconds. You can't even hear a song for 40 seconds. Like, change it, change. Like, moving on. It's like the fast paced city life. And in those places, what hookup culture looked like there was at least from my perspective, seemed way more transactional. It was less about your connection with someone, and it was more about, like, do you fit the stereotype of this space? As a man, did I look the certain way I needed to look to be there? And did I say the certain things I needed to say? Did I spend the money I needed to spend? Did I create this? Did I play the game the right way? Right. So those spaces was more kind of like there is a game that people who were in that space knew that game. I don't know. Maybe that was authentic to some people who created the game. But for me and my engagement in that space, and what I observed, I think, with a lot of people in that space, it was more like an amusement park kind of lifestyle. You were there. You weren't going to live like that. You were kind of like there to visit, and you're going to eventually dip out, although that's not necessarily the case. In any case, kind of cutting to the point, I remember having this moment. I was with, because I knew these folks in these scenes, so it was like kind of like associates of mine. So I interacted with them, and it need not be just a turn up party at times that I was, hanging out with those folks. So I recall being there once when I was in a relationship at a club, and dancing, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember alcohol was, just being heavily consumed by the group we were with. And this young woman and I kind of were just chatting. I wouldn't say there was anything very strong by way of chemistry. It was just kind of like we're sitting there with groups of people, and you engage different people throughout the course of an evening kind of thing. And this was like also like the places to sit and all that, right? Like lounge and booths and things like that. So it's like kind of just in a space. So I just remember though, as the night went on, and some of my friends were like, "Oh, hey, we're gonna leave," and I was like, "Yeah, cool, let's go." And she's like, "Oh, hey, could you give me a ride home?" Like my friend was driving, and we're like, "Yeah, sure." So we drive, get to a certain point. Oh, we get some food. We're just chatting. I'm not really thinking much of it, and then
She's like, "Hey, my faucet's leaking in my apartment. Do you think you can come in and check it?"
yeah, well, I think well, maybe it would have worked if that was the case, but it wasn't like that. She was kind of just like, okay, so we ate, we're all together, there's a few of us, and then we started to kind of think about the next step. And she's like, why don't you come over, to my place? And I was just like, oh no, I got a girlfriend. And she's like, you got a girlfriend? She got really mad. And she's like, you got a girlfriend? Why you say you're gonna take me home and you're flirting with me and like, like all this kind of stuff. She was under the impression,
Right.
this was going to be a hookup. So, I was like, oh, no, I'm sorry. Like, I guess, I misunderstood, or like I said, so I used the alcohol reference because I genuinely think there was just the lack of paying attention on my end to some of those cues, perhaps, that if I was more interested in it, I would have picked up on from that perspective. But what it also showed was this was an individual who was really kind of like maybe not really sure about this whole culture too, right? Because I think you kind of know if in certain setting, if someone's interested in you, and so maybe I was giving mixed signals. But when we got to talking, we were talking, and by this time, we stopped. We were eating. The night was going on when the drinks were not there any longer. So our senses coming a little more clear, and so her and I we talked for a moment, before we went our separate ways, and we talked, and she told me that she had a boyfriend too. And yeah,
So
yeah,
what?
it,
So what? I mean, pot meet kettle. I mean, why was she tripping on like, oh, why would you give me these signals? You have a girlfriend. I mean, if you have a girlfriend, it's like, well, what you was thinking about if you
no.
have a boyfriend.
Well, you brought it up, bro. She like me in situations perhaps I've been in the past, or perhaps others have been in is she was just thinking about herself. She wasn't worried about anyone else, her boyfriend or me. Like I was perhaps the experience she wanted. Her boyfriend was at that moment the experience she didn't want. So we talked a little bit about it, and she just said like, yeah, no. I mean, it came come to find out she wanted to break up with him, and she didn't do it yet, and she was just kind of being insensitive from the perspective of how he's going to feel. Clearly, if that's eventually how it went down, and I don't know, he finds out. I mean, I don't know how you choose to make a choice like that by way of saying like, I got to get out of this relationship. Let me sabotage it somehow, or I don't have the courage to say let me leave, so I have to like act on it somehow. I don't, lots of things, and it's all part of people's experiences, isn't it? So in her case, it seemed like she was just kind of like, the moment was such that she thought probably, okay, this is what I want here, and I don't care about the consequences, or maybe the consequences are what I want. So who knows? I don't know. We eventually kind of just like two people who are like in the world trying to figure out life. It's kind of like, well, good luck. Like, follow, kind of what this author of this article was talking about from these studies. It's kind of like, if you do it authentically, kind of like just open-minded, you can experience something. So in a way, like, although I wasn't maybe open to a hookup that evening, just the fact of being open, maybe like her and I, like maybe anyone else that would have been a hookup, right? But for some reason, it was me that night. We didn't do it. We just had the conversation. So maybe whatever words were shared that day, I don't know. She could be thinking back like, that guy was an asshole and led me on. And, who knows? I have no idea what's going on with that. But let me say, go back. So full circle with my experiences, hookup culture, I would say, overall, it's kind of something like to me, it reminds me of like television or like movies. It's something that's passing the time at its simplest form, but it can be of great transformation to your life at its greatest form, right? Like I say, TV and entertainment. I'm just meaning something to the effect of how life gets altered by various choices. So, a hookup culture could alter one's life so significantly and unexpected, maybe not unexpectedly, but so significantly. I'm talking about like pregnancy in particular, talking about sexual dynamics, and if those dynamics are not done with, being mindful about all the things to be mindful about with the power of that engagement. So, my sense is like a lot of people in that scene aren't really aware of the power of it. My experience was like that. Like, this is a pretty powerful process and energy process. And to just kind of engage it without connection can lead us more and more in a space of kind of dissatisfaction around connections and relationships in particular. So I would say like this: I don't know if it's from hookup culture or just in my experience in relationship in general, but I've had a lot of different kinds of experiences in different kinds of relationships. Due to that, it changes my perception about it quite a bit. So what I mean then is to share it with someone, my perception or some experiences I had, like say in partnership, I have someone who where our sexual dynamic, right, it takes on different energy. So at different times. So what I'm trying to say is like, I recall it was less of a hookup culture, although I would say it still fits within this category of non-commitment. I had a relationship with a woman. It was mainly sexual, mainly because the sexual chemistry was intense, super heightened. Like in each experience and the time we spent together, it increased that instant intensity. All that being said, we didn't share a lot of other things that would have made a committed relationship work. I wasn't necessarily interested in that. So, but now, we went our separate ways, and without all those details, it leaves the engagement with this partner has left a significant impression on me, an impression such that I have to process it a certain way, perhaps in future relationships. Although maybe with this one, I don't have a kind of current experience to speak of. In previous experiences, I did have that where I wouldn't say I was comparing one or another in a negative way, but yet it was somewhat of a feeling of comparison. Like I was judging people based off of my preference, which
Mm-hmm.
in a way is, I'm just objectifying that experience in a certain regard. And I think that's harder to do if you don't actually kind of engage with people in this way, right? If it stays in the realm of theory, it's kind of, there's not much there. So with that being said, it's kind of like, again, it need not be an energy that we as adult people, mature people, conscious people can't handle. Conscious people making shared decisions about how they want to engage each other is seemingly, you would imagine, would be within our capacity as humans. So at the same time, if we are kind of more hurt by those experiences, if we have engaged in more, hookup culture and it makes us feel shame or guilt, my sense is it's not the move. My sense is probably work it out another way, find another way to, do some of the healing work. So those are a few thoughts I was having around it. I still know people who operate from monogamy and partnership to people who don't do that at all and are having more open relationships. And my sense is each person is here in the world for a little bit of time to decide, what's leading them to feeling positive in their way in the world, in what's sort of lowering our energy and our experience. So my hope is that whoever's making choices, that we're doing it consciously. It's always a process. Of course, we're going to learn more as time unfolds. Of course, yet sexuality has great powerful effects. So in the realm of exploring it, I think it requires great care prior. I would encourage anyone to be very mindful, and myself included. I've those experiences briefly had led me to be more mindful in general around aspects of relationship and in particular sexuality, and how the power of the sexual experience can be one that brings people together and helps a relationship stay together. And maybe if you're committed to that person, that's really a beautiful tool at times, or connection. Yet if that's a person that's not someone you want to be with, and sex is kind of keeping one together just for the sexual dynamic, I think anyway, in my personal experience, it just, upon reflection, it's not the move. So thinking about creating a base, briefly, I'll share this last thought. Thanks, guys, for letting me say a lot of things, but I've used the analogy in the past, like making a cake. Frosting is like, hookup culture is like you got a tub of frosting and you just dip in it. But a relationship is like you build, you got to make a cake, and it takes time.
And then you put
And
the frosting in on the end.
after you cook it, and you got to cook it, let it settle, and then the frosting comes. So my sense is like, as an analogy, I think probably, and that we hadn't even spoken on too much about religious connotation to this, or aspects of
I'm about to bring it all up. Trust me.
obedience as a concept or as a way of life, or chastity as a concept or a way of life. Those are ideas that could go really deep. But from that not perspective yet, just the idea of like enjoyment of your time with someone in large part is in the work, right? Like in the building of the relationship, the things you go through together. Crack a few eggs to build that cake up. You got to stir it up, mix it up, and you do enough work, and then there's a time you get to cook it. You chill for a moment. You kind of appreciate, the connection, and then frosting when it cools down. So I'm saying all that to say I think hookup culture. Maybe you could say you could do that. It's just a snapshot. It's like a 24-hour cake. But my sense is that leads to type 2 diabetes and other concerns. So, there's trade-offs to it is all I'm saying. And maybe not, right? Like some folks live like this maybe their whole life and, I don't know, maybe they're content and it's fine. I'm not sure. I can't speak for them, but in my experience, the hookup scene was one that seemed like that fast life. It definitely was like a lane, the fast lane, and uh, put on your seatbelt and drive safe if you're going to get in that lane.
True that. So, yeah, you said a lot of things, but the main thing I want to touch on, because I think it transitions into a different part of the conversation that's less about our personal reflections, but thinking about this on a wider scale, and that's this. So, obviously, what episode was it? I know it was either in the long distance relationships one that we have yet to air, but we will. If you're listening to this episode, either the long distance relationship one has came out before this, or will come out soon after this episode. But either is the long distance relationship one or the lessons from the old flames, or maybe the should couples sleep in the same bed. We've always brought up statistics about marriage, right? And we haven't done a episode exclusively about marriage, but we're always bringing it up. So let me ask you this question to the both of you and to our audience. You often hear many times about relationships getting boring, marriage is getting boring over time. And oftentimes people are also, they don't just mean the day-to-day monotonous stuff of being with the same person for years and years and years, but they also are alluding to sex, like, life in the bedroom. And would you say that, I don't know if this is a question or a statement or both, but basically, how does hookup culture affect married life, or how does hookup culture affect our disposition towards marriage and certain concepts in marriage, such as sex getting boring over time? Because I can imagine if you're a 32-year-old boy or girl, or man or woman, and let's say you get married, let's say you're 32, and from the age of like 16, 17, 18 on to 30 or 31 before you met your partner, you're engaging in hookup culture, where I could imagine how it could feel pretty boring at a certain point, where it's like, it's like not necessarily, it's boring because having sex just with one person is boring in and of itself, but if you are, it's more about what you're accustomed to. If your habit, or the way you went about it prior to that was having sex with a multitude of people, then I can 100% understand how then it would feel to a certain degree boring if you're then regulated to having sex with just one person. And it's, but I think when people are talking about this, they're not necessarily thinking about it in those terms. They just, in their mind, or how I feel most people think about it in their mind, is like, oh, sex with one person is just boring. Whereas it's like, it may not just be what you're used to. It doesn't have to be boring in and of itself. So that's one thing I think we can think about when it comes to how hookup culture may affect marriage. But then also too, just in general, how this hookup, it's almost like, is the state and condition of our marriages a result, or a result partially due to hookup culture? Or do we have a hookup culture because we just don't believe in the process of marriage in general, and that's why it exists? It's like, which one is it really? Or is it a combination of both? Because in my mind, I think it's more so, I think there's a myriad of reasons why marriages are in the state and condition that they're currently in. But one of them, I think, is because of hookup culture and contemporary dispositions towards relationships, right? And I think that if you come from hookup culture and then trying to be in a marriage, I think that it does affect our marriages, like our past relationship history, both from a sexual and emotional standpoint. So yeah, I guess I can just leave it open to you guys to kind of talk about what are some of your thoughts in regard to how maybe hookup culture can affect our understandings of marriages and marriages themselves.
I think you're dead on. You're like right spot on. Hookup culture has a massive influence on marriages and relationships in general, everywhere. I think one of the biggest things from hookup culture and how it affects marriages is that beforehand and after, it really dumbs down narrows and squanders our understanding of relationships, romantic relationships in general, in terms of how we grow, the fact that we grow no matter what title we have on our heads as an individual, that we all, on a very nuanced level, come into the marriage with a sea of experiences and knowledge passed down through the genes that we are totally unaware of that plays its role into our marriages, and how much involved community should be in our marriages. You know, it's very normal, say it all the time, that when we enter into a romantic relationship, marriage or otherwise, committed, long committed, that it's kind of a norm now, to kind of drop off our friends and families and be really insular with our partner in life.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's, very, very unhealthy. So that definitely has an impact on there. Now, hookup culture comes with its many attitudes, norms, acceptances, thinking that pretty much lingers when we jump into our marriages. And a lot of this stuff doesn't disappear. Sometimes they hang on and they kind of morph into something a little bit different, a little bit more subtle just before we enter a long committed relationship. And so it just sits there during the relationship and it just plays havoc as situations unfold throughout the marriage. I'm eager to share with the audience and my co-host here a YouTube video that captures the beginning of hookup culture, really, and kind of shows for all of us how it can start out and how easily, because of how really destructive and deep-seated it is in the beginning, how easily it could linger on in the future throughout our many relationships, big and small, romantic, marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a TED Talks, along with psychology.com, with the article I showed with you guys tonight. TED Talks, I'm always listening to TED Talks. I love me some TED Talks. And this one in particular surrounds a parenting coach. This video, and I'll leave a link for both the article and this video when we post this content. So this TED Talk video was titled "The Unsexy Truth: The Hookup Culture" by a parenting coach named Lisa Bunnage, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She is a creator of a website called bratbusters.com. She has been in many talks, TV shows, programs, magazines, newspapers, you name it. And she's also a specialist in dealing with certain types of crisis. So in this video, she begins the talk by sharing a previous coaching session across the phone with, in particularly, a 16-year-old girl. And I've managed to record the dialogue she had shared with the audience during that TED Talk video, which is very illuminating. And again, the parenting coach in question in this session, her name is Lisa. So Lisa goes, "Hey, sweetie, how are you doing?" And the girl, 16-year-old girl she's talking to, goes, "I'm doing okay." Lisa says, "That's good. So how was your weekend?" The girl says, "It was okay. I partied and the usual. I drank a bit and met a new guy." Lisa's like, "Oh, what's he like?" The girl's like, "He's okay. I didn't really like him that much, so I wouldn't let him kiss me." And Lisa's like, "Good for you. I'm really proud of you." But then the girl just blows in and says, "So I gave him a blowjob instead." Of course, the audience at the TED Talks, they're all laughing and stuff like that. And she's like, "Real story, real story." And shortly after that, she talks about another coaching session where she talked to a 16-year-old boy who said to her that he was at a party, they were drinking, and there was all these kids there, and he shared his drink with this girl. And he said in complaint that afterwards she would even give him a blowjob. And so she really shares these two sessions to kind of paint just how bad, this is in her work. And afterwards, she goes real hard in the paint with a PowerPoint that basically demonstrates how leading up from the 60s up through the 2000s, how parental supervision and kids' respect for their parents gradually declines, as time goes on, as more and more parents, moms, started to enter the workforce and children were more left alone. She highlighted that in the 60s, not only were moms home and parents home, but neighbors, a lot of neighborhoods, they've watched over their own children. Neighbors tattletaled a lot on other parents when the children would do stuff and be wrong, and the parents would reprimand their child. The schools back then, she mentions, also played a huge role. They children got spanked. They were using a ruler. You got spanked with a ruler, if not, tapped on the butt. So there was a lot of parental supervision, even when it came to the educational system back in the 60s, which I kind of forgot personally. I thought that was interesting. And then the 70s came and saw more moms going to work. They started to leave to the workforce. A lot of moms after work were really tired. They come home, no energy because they've been working all day. And so kids more and more during this decade started coming home by themselves, letting the key in with the key, eat snacks, kick back and watch TV. They were more effectively alone. And during this period, she articulates how, this contributed to kids losing more and more respect for their parents. They actually started looking towards their peers for more guidance and other things. And at this time, too, she articulates that during the 70s, schools were no longer allowed discipline. They were losing power. And in the 80s, when the 80s came, this was effectively like the law. It was the norm. At this point, most moms went to work, and effectively schools' hands were tied in terms of discipline. Kids got more wilder and lost further respect for their kids. At this time, too, she mentioned that schools, even though they weren't allowed discipline, they were also being asked to do more parenting in terms of teaching kids about nutrition, manners, hygiene, and sex. During this time, too, there was a large wave of parenting books coming out about being friends with your kids. And the 90s came, of course, there comes the gaming. The computer started to make its rise. And things pretty much further deteriorated in terms of that because they were taking the place of parenting. And so she ends that PowerPoint around the 2000s. She begins talking about how, young girls were looking more like women. She talked about a time in which, she was talking to a guy who was checking out a 13-year-old girl who he thought was like in the mid 20s. And this happens to be a girl that she was working with her work in the schools. And she told him, no, I see her at school. She is around 13 years old, and kind of scared the guy away after that, but brought the picture of just how much the image, concerning, sexuality, and hookup culture was transformed so drastically over those few decades. She talks about smartphones and mobile tech and the fact that during this time, of course, in the 2000s, more and more children were on their phone, on the internet. So the point after this she makes is that none of the parents, none of them throughout those decades, and even before that, never really talked to their kids about sex. Occasionally you get the odd family that does that, but for the most part, it really wasn't discussed in families. She says that she would ask families, when her kids were growing up, how they would talk to the kids about sex. And she told us that most of them would just respond like, oh, I don't do that. It's just awkward. It's just so awkward. They go to school and learn that. It's just too awkward. So I thought was very interesting. But as a parenting coach, during her work, she says that even during her work, when she's talking to the parents after her coaching sessions, that none of them are really talking to their kids about sex either. Parents say that, oh no, they had this guy talking about sex at their school the other day. Nothing to worry about it. But she explains how, and I remember this myself personally. I'll never forget, the program was called the Mendes Foundation when I was in elementary, and we had sex speakers come in, to do their presentation about sex and stuff. But she explains how, these sex speakers at work that the parents refer to as an excuse are only there for roughly 2 hours, and there's only so much information they can cram into the children as it relates to sex within that 2 hour duration. It's just not enough information. She talks about that a lot of them during those programs, would use a demonstration with a banana and show, the condom being put on a banana and stuff like that. And she basically says all of this is just really ineffective. She concludes her point by saying if kids, aren't going to her parents, or they're not talking to their caregivers and they're not learning from these sex speakers, then where do you think they're going to? Pornography. Of course, pornography. Every single parent that she's talked to of a teenager pretty much shows denial, you know. And when she's talking to their kids tell her all the time because it's confidential. When she's talking to their children, it's confidential. It's just, part of the work, a rule. And kids tell her all the time that they do. They stay up all night watching porn. An interesting note was that the younger children that she deals with at her work normally comes across pornography through their older siblings because their older siblings would have their phone. They'll leave it by not paying attention, and the child will get to it, and they'll see what's going on. It's all on mobile. And, 8-year-olds, she says, they really don't understand what's going on, but they associate that to their parents. They don't go to their parents afterwards to discuss it because it's typically a bad thing. They know they'll get in trouble, fear of mom and dad. So they're learning from these devices, technology, and pornography, what life surrounding, sex and hookup culture is like. She talks about during her work that she had a session one time. Parents had called her or hired her because they feared their child was suicidal, and she arranged a session with them and found out that he was being bullied at school for not shaving down there. Now, taking in mind that children, according to her, 13, 17, 18, 19 years old, a lot of times are still pretty much bald in the genital area, boys. And so in the locker room, he said, they were changing and he was really the only one that had hair down there. And he was called names, ridiculed, and it really affected him mentally. And that's another example of how, these kids are young. Where do they get that from? Pornography. And she goes in depth into another session where they talk about rainbow parties. I'm not really going to get into that. I've learned what it was. It's horrible. But after she explained what rainbow parties were and that kids were involved in it, she says that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not even the worst she's heard in her work. So she ends that whole TED talk by saying, how do we redefine the norm and change the way future generations view sex?
That's, hey, if you don't mind me cutting in, that's exactly one of the big things I want to talk about. And because we know through, how many sociological experiments have to be done and psychological experiments have to be done to show that human beings naturally and through societal pressure are conditioned to follow the norm, adhere to the norm. And I think that, people talk about it from an evolutionary perspective. It's good to be part of the herd. You don't want to be out, the stray one out the pack because then you get eaten, right? I mean that literally and figuratively. So, but I think that also comes with its downsides because I think there are some things that are normal that need to be challenged, or there needs to be a level of consciousness surrounding it because there are a lot of deep, there are many implications, most deep in nature, that come to just adhering to the norm without any level of consciousness surrounding it. There are consequences and there are implications to that. And I think that that's part of what's at play here when it comes to hookup culture. It's the norm. It's the norm to engage in sexual activity before marriage. Doesn't matter what we espouse, as a society and what we say, our standards and our ideals are. The fact is that it's a norm, collectively speaking, in the United States of America. So I think that that's why a lot of people do it, is simply because it's the norm. Just like, we do many other things simply because it is the norm. And I think that, to me, is the biggest problem with anything that's not innocuous in nature that you may do because it's the norm. Because if you don't have that level of consciousness surrounding it, it can be very detrimental to you as an individual and to us as a society if we're just doing it primarily because it's a norm, or if that's a huge factor into why we're doing it. I mean, just even give you an example, like for me, myself, when you brought up one of those things about like, oh, I didn't really like him, so I gave him a blowjob or whatever, right? I was in high school. I was in the ninth grade and ninth or 10th grade. And this is a really, really small school. I went to 4 different high schools, but one of the first ones I went to was a really, really small one. I'm talking 150 people like total, maybe in the entire school. So everyone literally knows everyone. And I remember, long story short, like I was going to the bathroom or I was standing up near the door in class and like this kid comes over to me, you know, names have been changed to protect the identity of the innocent. So I'll just say this kid's name is like, let's say his name is Jason. His name was Jason. Jason comes up to me and he's like, he's like, hey man, well, let's not use Jason now. let's use.
Jason's like, well, don't mind if I do. You're welcome.
Let's say his name was, let's name his name was James, not Jason, right? James comes up to me and he's like, hey, dog. He's like, hey, you know, I forgot. Let's say the girl's name is Michelle. He's like, hey man, look, you know, Michelle just told me, go ahead and when you get the hall pass and you go to the bathroom, go ahead and go inside there, but wait a little bit because she's gonna come in and you know she's gonna help you out, whatever, right? Like, I forgot exactly what he said, but it was very clear what was happening. Like specifically about, you know, it was a blowjob. Like it was very clear through innuendo and through direct stating that's what it was, right? So I'm just like, no, bro. I don't know if I said no, but I was just like, yeah, no. I think I ended up not going. That's what happened. I ended up not going to the bathroom, right? And I remember like that. After that, I think he started the rumor, and to his credit, in his mind, it probably wasn't a rumor because it was so weird for him to see someone who's like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. That his only thought in his mind was like, oh, well, Armand must be gay, right? Because again, you're so conditioned to think that if you don't adhere to that norm, that there's something wrong with you if you don't, as opposed to you just not agreeing with whatever the norm is and wanting to participate in that mode of behavior. So, and even for the girl herself, why does she want to do it? Let's say she liked me, she was attracted to me, but why is that her first inclination is to do that? And again, it's because maybe the way she's been taught, what she sees is, if you like someone, oh, this is what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to show them, like, oh, this is how I want to act, I want to behave, right? And it's like, you know, when he thinks about hookup culture and these things, like how much are we mitigating like the actual truly profound experience of like getting to know people and learning about each other outside this context of like sexual relationships in this hypersexual society, you know? So I think that, you know, ultimately, again, two of the biggest things I mentioned earlier surrounding this that I think really prevent us from growing as a society is that, number one, it's a norm, and therefore, since we're not brought up and we're not brought up to challenge norms, we're brought up to follow and adhere and accept norms. So since we don't follow since we're conditioned in that way to follow norms, and because also we have this like, oh, it's good, it's bad, and this binary form of thinking when it comes to sex and sexual relations, this is really stifling our growth in this manner. Because again, when it comes to the, oh, this is good, this is bad, you're not really consciously thinking about it. You're just thinking like, especially when there's that religious connotation to it, it's like, well, forget it, you know, this is sex is natural, it's not bad, so I'm just gonna do it, right? And then it's like kind of freeing and liberating because like you're no longer, you know, adhering to this, or you're no longer beholden to this idea that if you engage in sexual encounters, you know, before marriage, that you're, you know, that you're a bad person or you're immoral, which again, you're not, right? But to me, it's so much deeper than that. Forget it, right? I don't think anyone who engages in premarital sex, it doesn't make you a bad person at all. Like, who cares? To me, that's not what it's about. It's about why are we doing it? What's the purpose? You know, how is it benefiting us again, and how is it affecting us individually and collectively? So, yeah, that norm.
We need to talk about it. You know, we need to talk about it. That's
that
essentially how she ends the TED Talk. And that's her advice to all of us: is that we must learn how to have a conversation about it. We have got to learn how to talk about it. You know.
Yeah.
And that's the point. We have to.
And I'll say that, you know, honestly, the only reason, who knows why I didn't, because honestly, some things people don't know about me is like, I'm an incredibly impulsive person, right? But I, through conscious effort, oftentimes like check my impulses to see, like, again, like I just want to act on my impulses. My impulses might not serve me, right? And there's been times when my impulses have not served me at all. And, you know, and I have to be, you know, careful what you're impulsive about, because, you know, what my first reaction is, you know, naturally in those type of situations, shit, it's like, what's that girl's name from Fleetwood Mac? Forget it, doesn't matter. But whatever her lead singer's name is. But, you know, that song Dreams, like when that guy told me that, and he's like, "Oh, she wants to do this," my initial reaction is, "Who am I to let you down?" Like Jason says it sometimes too. I mean, many people have told me this. You hear this saying sometimes, right? If you chase it, it's a sin. If it falls in your lap, it's a blessing. It's like part of my impulse is like, hey, yeah, hey, I can give you what you want, But again, it's like it's obviously a lot deeper than that. So, yeah, and especially if we're going here and we're not talking about this. I mean, again, that's the biggest problem. Like, how can there be such a big thing where whether it's parents are just kind of like, we're not going to talk about it. Their school will teach them. It's like it's a recipe for disaster. Anytime there's something that has a lot of power and effect over our lives, if we just kind of like our laissez-faire in our approach to it,
And she talks about children, what I'm saying? Young children, what I'm saying? If it's this bad as far as, conversating about it, breaking through the awkward and embarrassment of talking about it, then how much harder is it for older adults as we age to simply have a conversation about it, to unwind it, to look at it from a different respect than what they had before? It just becomes more solidified, more concrete. And as it relates to hookup culture, if it starts out like this in the beginning, no wonder it's so bad in our marriages, and many relationships in older age, so, you know, beat it, untangle it when it's young, but that doesn't stop just because we're older. What I'm saying? We need to learn to discuss it as adults as well, so we can better ourselves and continue to contribute to set the foundation to change how future generations visualize sex, and beat this hookup culture.
Yeah, because honestly, the last thing I'll say in my personal experiences, even for me, right? I'll use my like the time that and even like stuff that I have done with committed partners. It's like I think in life in general, and I know many people, they talk about especially our or the millennial generation, and maybe like what's the book after us, Gen Z, whatever, about living in the moment, and it's like oftentimes like living in the moment, stop thinking too much about things, and it's like it's like Gen Z, yeah, be free or whatever, and it's like you can live in the moment, but living in the moment to me doesn't mean you just live without consciousness surrounding surrounding your choices, and
Yeah.
lastly, one last thing I'll say about it is I completely forgotten how to brain fart, so I'm gonna let Jason talk.
If you guys jump in, you remember
No doubt,
Stevie
no
Nicks?
doubt. Oh, Stevie Nicks, thank you, Stevie Nicks. Who am I to let you down?
Yeah, well, we talk about matters of the kids, man, like this TED Talk talking about look like high school age kids and young folks, how we learn about sex growing up. Similarly, I recall being in the school having sex ed talks. Fifth grade in particular, I remember pretty strongly for some reason. My dad also, counseled in a certain way. I think being obviously a young man himself at one point, and I think he always tried to let me know he was available to talk about stuff. But I was not sexually active as a young man, so I didn't have anything to say to him. He was trying to like, hey, use protection and be smart about it. I think he just assumed I was doing it.
Yep, that's the assumption because it's the norm.
Yeah, exactly. But I wasn't, and so I never really thought about sex education, albeit going back to this article or this TED Talk, and had Tim brought it up, and myself included, pornography was something in my childhood. I grew up around it, and not that it was in the home per se, but much like the modern day cell phone, and you have access to the internet. I think in our case, it was like maybe someone's brother, maybe it was someone's parent had like a magazine or a video. And
That's
then,
how I first came across it. It was it was an advertisement.
yeah, we would have, I remember like, cause I mean, like we're saying, the parents, they don't want us to have it. It's probably premature, isn't it? Some of the dynamic. I mean, some of that stuff that you could see, I think, online could be profoundly traumatic. It probably all could be somewhat traumatic, depending on what age. Yet some of it's
Yeah.
really alarming. It's like aggressive, and even as an adult person who's seen a lot of things, you're just like, oh my, no way, dude. This is like
Yeah.
way too. This is a different level of something. I don't know. You could call it perversion. If
Well, yeah,
that,
I know
yeah.
we'll do an episode.
Degradation and domination. I mean, those are two to save the few.
Yeah, I mean, I know we'll do an episode of podcast
I was
about
just gonna
probably
say that.
about pornography, and we
Yeah,
can really get into deeper. But I'll just say,
yeah.
two things. One, for kids, it's extremely bad. You can't ever convince me there's anything positive that comes from little kids. Like, I'm talking like, I mean, it goes without being said, like kids like 7, 8, 9, like, I mean, come on. I mean, it goes without saying, but even like preteens, teens, when you start to hit puberty, still can't convince me there's anything positive about 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Nope. It's, to me, is this complete detrimental, especially again, the type of stuff that's on there. I mean, even into also, like, again, not gonna go too deep into it, but like, even if you're an adult who can make his or her own decisions, even then, there's not much positive. I mean, I think I know there's some company on Instagram I've seen, like, porn kills relationships. I forgot what the actual company's name is, but I see that shirt all the time. But anyways, I'll shave my thoughts, my thoughts for the actual episode where we talk about that. But go ahead, bro.
yeah. So as we think about pornography as its own kind of exploration, it is such. Maybe for young men, I'm not so sure what demographics are like as far as whose age range, but I know a lot of young men are using porn as ways also to connect to their friends and to, kind of like, I guess we could say, learn about some sexual things. And also I think it reinforces the
Masculinity.
toxic masculinity at that, and the objectification of women, but also men, objectification of ourselves as well, physically, that is, sexually, where it no longer is about a connection. It's now a performance in a way, right? It's like it should look a certain way, like this kid being made fun of for his natural, you know, uh, God given biological expression of pubic hair. The kids get ridiculed for it because of what majority of people are seeing in pornography. And
Exactly.
now you're talking about an expectation on how someone's going to behave. So my sense is a lot of men in our society growing up, like, I remember some facet of hookup culture was about bragging when it was with men in particular.
Of
And then,
course.
but at the same time, like, some of my friends, women, younger women in particular, had similar energy like that. Like, they bragged about it and kind of objectified men, or I don't know, whoever they were kind of hooking up with, kind of like, yeah, kind of like, again, not really. It was a similar energy. Had been shared, like it had been taught in a certain way to even some of the younger generation, kind of regardless of gender at that point. It almost was just like, get yours first and everyone else is secondary. And it translated in a sexual way, I think, in some of these arenas. And I think pornography is very much catering to that kind of attitude, which is pornography, if you consider it not from, hey, I'm going to try what I see, but rather just from an entertainment standpoint, which is, I'm going to see what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that kids, like, is saying that you could be up all night shows the robust nature, not only the power of, sexuality and hormones, especially when we're young, as hormones, puberty starts to come into it, but also that we are conditioning ourselves.
To put yourself first. Always, like, it's just all about me. I'm going to see what I want. I'm going to get what I want. So when it comes to an actual sexual relationship encounter, what should it be about? Service to someone else, essentially, or it's a collective endeavor. a collective, powerful, and profound endeavor between two people where there shouldn't be any level of selfishness. You're coming from a place where like you're only seeking to serve yourself without any thought of anybody else in the process. So how's that going to affect when you then go into an endeavor where it should be about us, and then you're conditioned to be thinking about you?
Yeah, and is very nuanced within those examples as well, isn't it? Because there's a facet of thinking I'm doing what I need to do as a man here, that, this sexual expression, most women will find this pleasing, and I will be considered, desirable, or, like a good catch or something. It's going to put my ego in such a space that I feel confident or something, right? So there's like an identity that selfishness is even wrapped in this idea of pleasing people, right? Like, it was not only a braggadocious kind of toxic environment, say, with this idea of like trophy or sport. It also, how was I going to relate? It was, excuse me, kind of saying brain cramp for a second, but the idea that, so you're bragging about it with maybe your friends, but you also brag about if you pleased your partner in a way, right? So in a way, it was kind of weird. Like, you had more bragging rights, perhaps, if you were good at something. So, if you were good at it, it was also kind of a known thing. Like, I remember in high school, a kid in high school who hooked up with a lot of he was a popular kid in school. He hooked up with a lot of
I think you
popular.
told me about this guy.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it had a profound impact on my recognition. This was a
The
person
soccer
who,
player?
right, like, in any case, when I was looking at it from a high school perspective, it it was a lot of just make believe stuff. It was like people making up a lot of rumors, and it seemed like it was like you went down that road as like, I don't know, it just kind of happened. A stigma's created or a narrative's created, and then people kind of like expected to somehow follow that narrative, right, or find out for themselves, kind of thing. So I say all that to say, like, those were all part of the more or less hookup culture energy, which again was kind of grandizing the ego and kind of sensual encounters. I don't know, physical encounter. Maybe it wasn't sensual; it's just physical or sexual. I don't know. But the point being that it's stigmatized in more ways than one. It's nuanced in its toxicity when it comes to, especially, the male energy around sexuality, and in the mainstream in particular. And we've been sexualized. Our society's been so sexualized, in our gender, those who identify as he, his, and him. It's been so uh, binary in a way too. Like, we're been uh, kind of watered down from a human being with capacity to a very basic creature that's desiring sexual things, or money, and some sense of power, some kind of like demeaning, I think, to the nobility of a human. When you look at a young boy and girl, I mean, who is in fair consciousness and in fair mindedness looking at a young boy and thinking, this isn't much better than an animal down the road. There's no hope for him. He's going to grow up in a society with very few examples, and the people who will be his examples are behaving in ways that are destroying, life and well-being. I mean, that's a tragic consideration. So we have to really evolve ourselves, beyond, move in a space beyond that too.
Yo, you still with us, Jason?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Was there tech difficulties?
You just spaced.
Maybe.
They said just moving in space beyond. You just cut out for a quick second.
Oh, so let me just finish it and say, so pornography might be something. Another thing that fits into this conversation is sexuality and manhood in general, and heterosexuality in men, physical intimacy. That's another thing that we haven't touched on with men, like a platonic physical intimacy, fathers and sons and grandfathers, if you will, men being physically satisfied from their, uh, brothers. And what I mean to say is, as a young person, we think less about gender. You'll see a father treat his daughter and his son at a certain age almost identically. But then at some point, father might treat his son different because he's becoming more grown. So I think there's a huge lack of physical intimacy in our collective society, healthy physical intimacy uh, between men, and in particular fathers and sons.
What does a healthy physical intimacy amongst men look like?
My sense is it has some relative expression similar to healthy physical intimacy that we see in women, which it could include just more, um, shared shared satisfying physical engagement. So I don't know, maybe it's putting your arm around your friend at a certain time, or uh, with a father and a son. I don't know, maybe father's holding his son's hand longer, just a little bit longer than saying, "Oh, now he's 7, so I don't hold his hand. He needs to start being a man or something." I don't know. You hold your kid's hand until your kid doesn't want to do it anymore or something. I'm not sure what it looks like. What I think it looks like though is when we see young people in particular, or physically people who have evolved in a healthy way, I think sexually. And I bring up in men, maybe there's other women who could speak on it from their own gender perspective, or maybe there's other folks who have different perspectives altogether. But my sense is that women are a little more free to express a range of emotions and physical expressions. If an adult woman touches a child on the shoulder and says, "I'm really proud of you," usually people are like, "That's great." But if a man does it, you could be like, "Wow, why is that man touching that kid like that?" As a teacher, I work with kids. I was told things just directly and plainly, like, as a man, you're going to need to do it this way because you're a man, and you have there's all the people who typically hurt kids are men, sadly. So when it comes to those kinds of ways, hurting children. So I say all that to say, my sense is if there's healthy physical expression in one's life, I'm not so sure it gets out of hand as quickly as it might if we don't, right? If we're deprived of a feeling or a need, and then we get an option, it comes our way, like some people will respond in a almost life threatening mode, right? Like they're feeling, something is good is happening, but they don't want it to end. They can overreact. So my sense is, like, if we were just really stayed healthy with our young children, we maintain healthy connection, and we allowed boys to be physically intimate and not say that they're gay. Like if you say, you didn't want a blowjob, you're considered gay. It's a whole other thing, man. Imagine holding hands with your platonic male friend, holding hands in your high school and saying, "No, we're just friends." It's like, it's fine. Like, we're just friends. Like, what kind of attention that would get, and who would say, and how many people would create some kind of difficult situation for that dynamic. So anyway, the only way it happens typically is like in sports. You'll see like a lot of sports men
That
are
is
able to touch each
interesting.
other.
That is interesting. I was just
Yeah,
about to
no
say that
one,
because I was going to
right?
say no cap. For me, it's like, look, I don't know if I'm going to be, holding hands with another guy walking down my high school class. Or, I'm not going to knock someone if they want to do that. I'm not going to automatically assume they're gay if they do that. I'll have to see other evidence, and obviously it's immaterial if they are. But it is funny because as you're saying, I'm like, but in sports though, because I was thinking like, okay, why in my mind is it weird in my head if two guys are walking down, the hallway holding hands? But then if I see in sports, if you're slapping each other in the ass, like it's just fine. You don't even think about it as nothing. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. Well, to finish that thought, I think it speaks to the reality that physical interaction is very human and it seems necessary, that we need to engage physically with life and including humanity. So, and there's ways to do that. And I think if we were having more balance, we would be doing a lot healthier. We'd have a lot healthier expression, platonically, sexually, romantically. I imagine a lot of these things would find their way in a different light because as much as one is going through life, we have a lot of choice. And as adult people, is strong as the physical or sexual impulse is, it actually can be channeled in other ways, which I won't get into it now, but I had to practice that too because, if for me, when I was in the way of um, hookup culture, say, I do feel it had a strong energetic effect on me. Like it weighed on me. Um, and I kind of had to like heal from it, recover from it. One of the things that I did was, what I say would be like abstinence or monk life. I just let it alone altogether, let alone the sexual kind of energy. And you'd be surprised how quick kind of uh, the body, one in consciousness and in tune with the body isn't really desiring sexual experience that much. It's not like it's like, well, for some folks, oh, every day I have to have sex every day. It's like, I don't think the body naturally is needing to do such things.
But if
Maybe it
you eat it like
can
that, yeah.
times, but I'm not, my sense is that in my experience with letting the body, and again, everybody's different, but it's more balanced. It comes and it goes, but it's it's not so intense either that you can't function. It's almost like any other energy. It comes and it works itself through. It leaves, or if you move it in a certain way, it's a creative energy after all. Sexuality is a creative dynamic, so there's a lot of creative ways to utilize it, which are not having to be sexual. They're just energetic, or excuse me, creative energies that can assist with maybe the intensity of it if we don't have options, recognizing that there's many ways to move life. But anyway, so I'll leave it at that. There's a lot I said. I appreciate you guys letting me share it. And let me just, for my final thought on it, because I don't know how much longer we want to record, but if this is the final thought, I
Yeah,
just
this
want to
is
say,
final thoughts. Go ahead.
um, really, for me, my hope really is people are moving in the world in a conscious way, that you're really trying to understand what helps you move through the world well. And so whatever choices people make, man, I hope you're doing as conscious as possible. And fear not to be patient, and observe. We can always observe. We need not learn always from our own experiences. We can observe other people's experiences too, and maybe, let's consider many ways to learn about these things, and try not to rush powerful energy. If there's a powerful aspect like in sexuality, hopefully we learn more about it. So in the 206, thanks you all. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in. Obviously, Armand, Tim, as always, blessing to speak here. And until the next one.
No doubt, appreciate it. Guess I'll go ahead and go next and give my final thoughts. And I will say this, as I mentioned previously in this episode. I think anybody's particular. This is particularly to anyone who's young who's listening to this, and also I don't. Shout out to, apparently we have some listeners in the UK. Throughout the various cities in the UK. Every time I go on the website we use to host the podcast and look at statistics, it shows me those people. I don't know how you found the podcast. There's some people in Germany that are listening to as well. So if you're listening to it right now, if you stayed through the whole 1 hour and 40 minutes, then this is a shout out to you guys. I also will say it in the beginning of another episode too, in case people didn't listen to the entirety of this episode. Also, for some people, for some reason, a lot of people are listening in two random cities in the U.S.: Boardman, Oregon, and Ashburn, Virginia. Shout out to you folks too, because you were some of the first people. But anyways, what I want to say is, particularly to anyone who's on the younger side listening to this, please, please, please move beyond this stigma of like right and wrong and good and bad, and like, am I a good person if I don't have sex, and a bad person if I do have sex? To me, it's really you're missing the point, and it's really preventing us from growing again individually and collectively. And let's think more so about it, as we said, with consciousness. Think about why you're doing it. How is this going to affect you as an individual here and now in the moment? How it's going to affect you in the future? And what is really the point of you wanting to engage with this if you decide to? And think about all the implications of it, and make some observations and go from there. So that's the biggest takeaway, I would say. And other than that, I'll pass it to Tim.
Yeah, man. I appreciate my co-host being in this space with me in this conversation, as always, including all of our listeners. I'll leave with the statistic as well as just a quick message. According to the American Psychological Association, I believe in 2013, most recent data suggest that between 60% and 80% of North American college students will have some sort of hookup experience. And my main message to everyone is talk, conversate. We need to bring that back. Things like everything's multifaceted. Hookup culture has its effect on our mental, emotional well-being, but hookup culture is inversely affected by our jobs, by our family, by what we do. Every aspect of society has its gravitational pull on another. And the only way we can bridge that understanding and bring it in is to conversate about it. From the moment Homo sapiens, begin to create written language, it's set in stone, a precedent that the way we communicate constantly has to grow and improve. And we have to place it on a very, very, very high priority and high pedestal. So talk. Bring that back. We need to understand that texting all the time or talking to one person and deriving your whole sense of identity based off, one to a handful of people is unhealthy no matter which way you cut it. So no matter how young you are, no matter how old you are, the fact that we live and died and we were happy does not negate the fact that we are missing out on a lot of activities and actions that we need to be exercising in our day and age in order to make our lives healthier, but our future generations healthier. That never stops, no matter what age you are. So just simply talk. And that's it. Much love from the 206 to everyone out there. Stay strong, stay perseverant.
All right, guys. Yep, no doubt. Thank you, everyone who listened to the entirety of this episode, the whole 1 hour and 44 minutes of it. And even if you didn't listen to the entirety of this episode, and you're not hearing me say this out loud right now, you're a real one as well. You're all real ones. Anybody who engaged with us, even if it's for a minute, 10 seconds, doesn't matter. We love you all. And until next time, be easy and peace out.
Deuces.